Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com, and our brand new Minnesota Wild website, MiniIce.com. Here, as always, with Mr. Joe Oberly. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Happy holiday week to y'all, and it's good to be here.
The Winter Wonderland.
Yes.
Got a lot
Coming
of
down
today.
heavy in Minnesota.
Yeah. Someone that is away from the perpetual winter of Minnesota is Mr. Mike Tice, who joins us every week. How you doing, Coach?
I'm doing great, guys. How you doing? Getting ready? Christmas is almost here, boys.
I know.
It is.
I got it.
We're celebrating today because my daughter has to work on Christmas, so they're in the other room furiously cooking, and I can smell it. So as soon as I get done with here, I'm gonna go eat.
Oh man, that sounds good.
I have literally bought 0 presents at this point, and it's the clock is ticking for me. My Christmas may end up like the Vikings' playoff chances, not too great based on that information.
Pretty grinchy.
Yeah, it's it's a rough time of year. The Bears game was kind of a gut punch for the Vikings. They're not out of it mathematically. I actually don't think I'm not the most optimistic guy, as Joe can attest from doing a show with me for 3-4 years now, but I think they have a semi-decent chance of making the postseason, but I don't really think that's the goal this season. I guess the best way to start with looking at the Bears game is to really see Coach first. I want your opinion on the Bears as a threat in the NFC. It's funny how the narrative can change so quickly in the NFL from their season falling apart, losing 6 games in a row, kind of the anti-stretch that the Vikings had. Now they put a couple good wins together. Trubisky's looked good. Now they're not out of the playoff hunt for that 7th seed by any stretch of the imagination. Do you think that they're some sort of threat for the playoffs, considering the parity that's in the NFC right now, or what's your take on them?
No, I think they've got a decent defense, plays very solidly, but offensively, Trubisky's doing better, and the reason he's doing better is they're running the football. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 games, they're rushing the football at a very high average, a very big yards per game. I mean, they also had a great game against Montgomery, and I talked about Montgomery in the last show, I believe, and also on Barrero on Sunday. I mean, Montgomery, 32 carries, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. As a team, the Bears ran for 199 yards. They're running the football. So now they're in it. So they're not exposing Trubisky. And we'll see what happens moving down the road here in these last couple of weeks. But I don't see the Bears as a threat in the playoffs.
For what we've seen from Trubisky in the past is if you can get to him a little bit and rattle him, if you contain him from running out of the pocket, he's not going to make the best decisions. And the Vikings did not do anything to make him nervous back there. I mean, the times he did run out of the pocket, he was already sitting back there how long, and no pressure on Trubisky is it's going to help that running game. And Montgomery, I don't even want to mention his name. My son used him to knock me out of the fantasy football playoffs.
Yeah, I picked him up too.
Nice pickup.
I gave him out on the show last week. Where, by the way, I went 4-1 with my picks.
Ooh.
Yeah, odds and ends. Yeah.
Look at that. Yeah, Coach hosts a YouTube show / podcast called Odds and Ends that everyone should check out, especially if they want to know the future, because your picks are borderline clairvoyant at this point, and I'm a little afraid. The reason I brought up how good the Bears was relatively selfish, because I think I wanted to ease some of the just confusion that I had about how that game went down. I thought maybe they're putting something special together. Trubisky's undefeated against the Vikings. I don't know if it's as simple as he's mobile, and there's been the narrative of mobile quarterbacks kind of being the kryptonite against Zimmer's defenses when they're at their peak, and this defense clearly isn't at the peak of what he wants to do schematically. Is that, I mean, Joe, you alluded to that a little bit. I mean, is that what you would say is why Trubisky moved the ball with impunity, not just via the run game, but it seemed like
It was.
they spent 6 drives in a row. It was just they couldn't stop him.
Right, and every time the Vikings did claw their way back in, the defense was able to stop them down the field. I mean, they like Coach says, they ran the ball. You set up the passing game with the run. I mean, they're probably shell shocked back there from the way Montgomery was running over him. So as soon as you start doing that kind of, I think it hurts or limits some of the things Zimmer can do defensive wise. And Trubisky was able to make enough passes, make enough plays, and just be calm back there that he could. And that's all it took, because every time the Vikings came back in, they answered, and there was no catching them on Sunday.
No.
Yeah, it was a deflating loss. I like I said, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks. This team makes too many mistakes, and there's a lot I think that people can be positive about moving forward. I mean, there's just been so many injuries on this defense. They've basically lost 13 of their top guys of the defense from last season to this season. But one of the reasons I like talking to you, Coach, one of the many reasons, is that when you write about a team or a sport, quote unquote, for a living, you hear a lot of people using cliches or adages, either positively or negatively, and I hear a lot of Zimmer never plays to win, plays not to lose, which could mean a myriad of things. It's very generic, but there was a lot of consternation, and there has been increasingly so, about the conservative nature of the offense, and people blame Kubiak or Zimmer. It looks like Kubiak's doing a lot more. He's kind of a 50-50 run to pass guy now. He wasn't always that way before he got here. What is your take on cliches like playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win? And do you think that's a fair assessment of either this team or any risk-averse or conservative or old-school offense in today's NFL?
Well, there's a lot of great zone play-action offenses in the NFL. I mean, look at one went to the Super Bowl last year in the 40 with the 49ers, and I just feel like the defense has lost a lot of bodies. They're banged up. They're young. They're not where Coach Zimmer wants his defense to be. They don't turn the ball over as far as creating a lot of turnovers, and that's a big problem. But you say risk reward. I could think of 2 or 3 times this year in very critical times where Mike went for it on 4th and 1.
It's true.
And think about the Seahawks game. I believe it was the Seahawks game, and everyone wants to point fingers, and rightfully so. There's the NFL. Everybody wants their teams to win, and then Vikings fans get frustrated again. But I think Coach Zimmer is an excellent football coach. So is Gary Kubiak, and if the offense is working, everyone would be saying, what a great offense. It works for other teams that are using the same type schemes, and we'll see what happens here.
Yeah,
maybe some of that. I was going to say maybe some of that comes from how they're setting up things for the quarterback who hasn't taken as many downfield shots this year, and it's a little bit more conservative. And Kirk is not is he by nature. I think he's a little bit cautious back in the pocket, and not just he's not a gunslinger by nature. So maybe that's part of the same thing. But I would agree. Zimmer is certainly taking his chances on defense and being aggressive, and maybe since some of it didn't work out, that he's not done that as the season's gone down to this
I don't
point.
think the offense. I mean, I understand that people see all the talent that they have at the skill positions on offense, and they expect. We've been spoiled as Vikings fans for my entire life, just having these amazing skilled position players: Randy Moss, Chris Carter, Percy Harvin, and Adrian Peterson, so on and so forth. And I think they get a little frustrated because they're looking for some sort of 1998 style offense with Jefferson and Thielen, but I don't think the offense for the Vikings is the problem. And I mean, as we've seen, they kept them in this game. They have executed the offense perfectly. The Seahawks game is a really good example of that. They really needed Cousins to be efficient and have those long, methodical drives to keep Russell Wilson on the sidelines as long as possible. That worked, save for that fourth and inches at the end of the game that you mentioned, Coach. So Justin Jefferson's breaking records, so on and so forth. I think the offense again has a lot to build on, and is the reason that this team is turned around since the bye. So I understand that people, it's all hindsight, like you mentioned, but people, they don't like this quote unquote conservatism, but you're right, they do go for it on fourth and short more this season than usual. I have a feeling that, because when you talk about your game picks each week, and the number one metric or the best metric for determining the outcome of a game is turnover differential, and this isn't a defense that turns the ball over a lot in the Vikings, so they can't really afford to really take a lot of deep shots over and over again, especially when the offensive line doesn't protect Cousins and give him enough time to do that unless he's rolling out most of the time. So I don't have a lot of complaints about this offense, to be completely honest with you.
Well, they're -5 in the turnover differential, which you guys know I'm big on. And traditionally, a team that's 0, +1, or -1 is right around a 500 or 9-7 or a 7-9 team. At -5, what do you expect to get? And speaking of throwing the ball deep, maybe not in 40-yarders, but in 20-yarders, Cousins is 8th on the list. He's got 49 throws of +20. Of course, wow. Mahomes, you could have guessed, is first with 63, but Aaron Rodgers only has 52 of those. And so he's only 3 behind Rodgers. And you talk about, he's not throwing the ball deep very well. But 40-yarders is a different story. Aaron Rodgers is first with 13, and Kirk Cousins is down the line with 6. So those deep shots, you got Russell Wilson, who's in double digits, and Ryan Tannehill, believe it or not, and they're another run play action team. Probably a little bit better in the drop back passing game, and then Kyler Murray is right up in that list with the +40. But with I don't think getting the ball down the field is the problem. I think holding up, and I've been saying this for 2 years, holding up in key passing situations when everyone in the world that's watching the game or playing the game or coaching the game knows that it's going to be a pass, they've got to hold up better.
Yeah, and I always like to see what fans are saying, what the narratives are. It's easy to, being completely honest with you, it's easy to write articles that way and be in touch with the fan base. But one of the things that I saw after this game was something that I reached out to you and a couple of former Viking centers about this week in an article that I'm working on right now, is the idea with Garrett Bradbury that it takes 4 to 5 years for a center to develop in the NFL. And I couldn't think of a better person to ask about that than you in the entire world. What are your? I got a couple different answers from the guys that I've talked to, the former players. What's your take on the idea of a center taking 4 to 5 years, or taking longer to develop than maybe other positions on the offensive line?
I'm not sure it's 4 or 5 years. I've been blessed to coach, and for the first time, 3 Pro Bowl centers that were made the Pro Bowl under our coaching, myself and my assistant, and the offensive coordinator who was calling the plays. And 3 years with Matt Burke was the longest, and that was because he was a converted left tackle. And Jeff Christie moved over to center, and I want to say his 3rd or 4th year. He was swinging at guard when I first got there and worked for Denny Green. And then Rodney Hudson, we got in as free agent for the Raiders, and Rodney had not made the Pro Bowl, and we picked him up as free agent. I'm going to guess it was his 4th year or so. And he made the Pro Bowl in our first season there with the Raiders. And then I was blessed to coach one of the better centers that's ever played in Olin Kreutz, but I coached him at the end for the Chicago Bears, I coached him at the end of his career when his elbow and his body was falling apart. Unfortunately, I loved the kid. I worked him out at the University of Washington when he was coming out of University of Washington. But it takes time to be a Pro Bowl type center. That doesn't mean you can't play the position well. And I would have to look at tape and grade it like a football coach grading for a draft or grading an opponent. And I'd have to grade 3 or 4 or 5 games to even give any type of educated opinion on whether Bradbury's a good player or not.
Aren't they kind of just like the quarterback of the offensive line? So they're setting the alignments and alerting everybody else to what's going on. So they need a different skill level than just some of the other offensive lines. Was that what you would think, Mike?
Well, they're heavily involved in some teams more than others. And our team, we always gave the teams I've coached, we've always gave the center the first call, and the quarterback had the option to turn the call over to a different point. Point out the linebacker, or change it, or audible. And the centers have to really study hard. They have to know football. I always like to have my centers understand coverage, so they knew, if it was single high, two high, and if certainly, a better understanding of the blitz package that was coming, because that helps you with the slants of the defensive line and all of those type things. But it's a hard position to play, that and tight end and quarterback and middle linebacker, safety. These are all tough positions to play, and it takes smart guys that are students of the game, and it takes time.
Joe, if I could just chime in with Bradbury, part of me thinks this is, everything changes each week to week in the NFL, and even on, a player's only seems to be as good as his last performance. And part of me thinks Bradbury has a bad game, and everybody's going to be on his case, because earlier in the season there were people singing his praises and how he was really anchoring the line. So yeah. I think that's a little bit of what's going on here.
And we touched on this.
Losing is what's going on, and giving up 13 sacks in 3 weeks. So let's not BS each other. Losing and giving up 13 sacks in 3 games is what's going on.
Yeah, it's been the through line, as Joe will attest, that we've talked about nearly week in and week out for years, since 2016, really, the offensive line. And hopefully, I feel like for the first time there's some optimism on the line. Ezra Cleveland looks good. Brian O'Neill is obviously great. Riley Reif is having his best season in years. Dakota Dozier is kind of the outlier there, and so hopefully they'll shore up that spot. I'm not sure how much for a center, how much having somebody on either side of you that isn't performing well impacts what you have to do as well, Coach. Bradbury's had, like I said, Cleveland's played well, but Samia wasn't playing well last season. We had issues at guard. The season before that, we had a ton of issues at the position before he arrived here. Is that something that can really impact his individual performance if he feels like he has to perhaps either consciously or subconsciously assist somebody that's next to him?
Well, I have not studied their protection schemes enough to comment on who's helping who. So okay. I'm the wrong person to ask. You'd have to give me an assignment and pay me money to grade some games to give you a real true assessment of the talent and what's going on with the offensive line. I'm just a fan like everybody else and tries to watch the games on Sundays and this week on Christmas on television. That's all I am.
Well, maybe the Vikings need to do that. Pay you some money and have you grade their line.
That's not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea at all, right?
Hey, we'll float that out there. I love getting your opinion on these things. I have a feeling what your answer is going to be on this one, but a lot of people wanted to make a big deal about Justin Jefferson's hot mic moment that he came out and said was being blown out of proportion. I'm not one of those guys that glorifies the fact that I played varsity hockey at one of the worst hockey schools in the state of Minnesota.
Feed the dog, Joe. Feed the dog, will you?
I'm sorry. Yeah, he wants me to get done so he can start
Feed
getting
him. Feed him.
the stuff falling off our Christmas table. That's exactly right.
Again, the team's losing. People are looking for negative narratives for whatever reason. I mean that I know the answer to this question, but I would love your insight on just how normal that is for the guys that play at this level to, get frustrated like that, even with one another, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's some sort of grudge or ongoing problem.
Yeah, no, I in the heat of the battle, guys say things. In the heat of the battle, I said things, and you get together and you talk it through, and I'm sure they did, and you move on, and that's part of being competitive and wanting to win. And when you want to win and your juices are flowing and the stress of the game and the pressure to win, it all takes its toll. And sometimes you snap, and that's just the way it goes.
Do you worry sometimes that those are symptomatic of underlying problems, like i.e. Stephon Diggs, who started complaining and then got his way out of here, or is that something as a head coach you got to be wary of when you hear something like that?
Well, as a head coach, you're wary of everything. So I'm sure the head coach understands and knows what's going on. I'm sure he's addressed it in his way, and you move on. You try to win a game and keep your hopes alive.
Yeah. Speaking about winning games, I mean, like I alluded to, the Vikings aren't necessarily mathematically out of the playoffs. They have to win both of their games. The Bears lose one of their remaining games, and then I think the Cardinals lose both of their games.
Joe. Yeah. Tell me what store you can buy that calculator out to figure out that they have hope. And I want to rush there and get one before Christmas. What store can I buy that calculator that says the Vikings have a chance to make the playoffs?
Yeah, he doesn't have one of those for his odds and ends shows.
I need one of those calculators, man.
That would ruin easy. That would ruin your pick streak, I think. It's called the delusional store, and it keeps me up at night. I don't know why I have a little bit of hope. What am I doing to myself? Because I know it's impossible. But it just feels frustrating because you look at like the Saints and how they've played the last couple of weeks. Obviously, Breeze is not 100% or anywhere near that. He struggled last week, and even over in the AFC, teams like the Steelers that looked unstoppable are kind of in a free fall. I don't know what's going on there. But
it's called the NFL. It's called the NFL. It's crazy, right? It's just crazy. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen in the NFL week to week, and teams catch up with teams. The defenses are starting to do a better job, and they took a while to catch up. But let's talk about some good stuff with the Vikings. How about Dalvin Cook, 1,833 scrimmage yards?
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Tied for first with 15 rushing touchdowns. Who's he tied with?
Henry?
Yeah, Derrick Henry tied, yeah. How about Thielen? Give him a shout-out. Third in the NFL in touchdowns. He's got 13 touchdowns.
And he leads the league in red zone touchdowns.
And you know who's in front of him? Tyreek Hill with 15 and Devonta Adams with 14. So there's some good things going on. They just get overlooked, when you have 34 sacks or whatever you have, 13 in the last 3 weeks. And, there's some good stuff out there. And Jefferson's a young player and plays with emotion, comes from a winning program, You're drafting guys from winning programs. You better expect them to get frustrated when you're not winning, and that's just the way it goes. So.
How about the play Cameron Danceler makes last weekend? That interception in the back end zone. I mean, it was a phenomenal athletic feat, and it's this guy who has been in and out of the lineup all year, a little bit because of injury, but he has just slowly built all season long. So he gives the fans hope for a little bit for that defense to take another step next year. A guy like him and Gladney, I've been really appreciating how well they've grown this season.
Well, look, you got a defensive head coach. You got a coach that specializes in great defense. Still really great in certain areas, certain aspects. I haven't looked at this week's numbers, but really good on third down, red zone type situations, which are key critical situations. And they got a young defense. They got a lot of injuries. So is a lot of other people. Injuries, to me, are not an excuse. But, they're going to grow. They're going to grow. They're going to get better. They have some offensive line things to be addressed. They have a great crew up there in their personnel department. in their contract department. They'll figure it out. They'll get some they'll get some players in there, and we'll see how this offseason goes. But they got to finish up strong. They got to finish up on a high note and knocking off New Orleans and then finishing up who they got last, Detroit, or who do they play?
Detroit.
And so they finish up with 2 wins. Let the chips fall where they may. Who knows what happens with these other teams?
There is, you're right.
And see what happens.
There's a lot to be positive about. I mean, the corners have come on late in the season. They have had a lot of injuries, like you said, and it's something that I think people should look at from maybe a longer term lens than instant or this season gratification, which I understand is the nature of how people consume media with Twitter and wanting to get stories in 2 sentences and so on and so forth. But this team, bringing up the personnel department and the way that they've handled these contracts, really, I mean, it's been remarkable. They've had a lot of guys that are either all pro or Pro Bowl players. Justin Jefferson made the Pro Bowl in his rookie year, which is just astounding. He could still break the record from the AFL from their first season, I think in 1960, for total yards from a rookie. He's 1,400 something. He could very well beat Randy Moss's rookie yardage record. He's done it with not necessarily having 100 some catches, like some other receivers might have. He's done a lot with very little. I think pointing out the 20-yard catch thing is huge. Dalvin is obviously remarkable. So I'm really, really bullish. But then again, I do have a sponsor in the calculator world, as you alluded to. So I'm a little biased. Again, but it feels like the NFL is kind of wide open, more so than usual. It's a parity league. That's what makes it interesting each year. But we'll see what happens with the Saints and on Christmas, and see, like you said, if the chips fall in their favor. If not, there's a lot to build around. It was inevitable that the season was going to be one of growing and looking at it. I look at it that way. Are they learning? Are they developing? Are they limiting, whatever you want to call it, a reboot, a retooling rather, and are they going to be in the best position moving forward to reopen the contention window? And I think that's really the case, and I think that should be the takeaway from this season, considering all the youth and the craziness in the COVID they're in. But yeah, Coach, thank you so much for joining us this week, as usual. I really, really hope that people check out Odds and Ends with Mike Tice. You can Google it. You'll find it on Apple Podcast. I think it's not called iTunes, or I don't know what it's called anymore. Apple Podcast. You can find it on YouTube if you just type in Mike Tice for Odds and Ends with Mike Tice. Or if you go to VikingsTerritory or PurplePTC.com, we post every episode on each site. You'll find it there. Subscribe to that.
He was 4-1 last week, and the other one was by half a point. My goodness.
I know. I got the Colts. I gave out the Colts -7.5. They win by 7. I could have won 5-0 for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're hanging in there. We're 43-30-1, boys, for the season. That's not bad.
That's pretty good.
Not bad with the spread, right? So
yes, Odds and Ends with Mike Tice. I mean, the spread is always the tough one. If you can do that, if you can put up numbers like that, man, that's worth listening to.
Hey, listen, you guys have a great holiday, and I'm ready to make the potatoes that the recipe you sent me, Joe. And you guys have a great holiday, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you next week, huh?
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Coach.
You too, Coach.
Happy holidays to you.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Boy, as usual, the insight is impeccable. Yeah, I just love it. You, Joe, you brought up a point here that I wanted to get on him, but or ask him about, and maybe we will later on as we start heading towards the draft. But I would love to hear his insight on how much a coach talks to, Spielman or the general manager. And do they say, hey, I need these positions. These guys are up there trying to figure out ways to put the contract together, make them all fit and get the best team out there. And how much does the head coach have in that? Because, does he just say, this is my needs, and then he walks away? Or is he eyeballing people and saying, hey, you got to make sure to get this guy in or keep this guy? I mean, how much? There's some in that discussion, but but how much? I don't know if they'll ever answer that, but it'd be
Yeah,
fun
and
to
I
hear.
think it varies from team to team. I think people have always looked at Zimmer and Spielman as kind of a dynamic duo. Uh,
Exactly.
that Zimmer has a lot of input, especially when it comes to the draft. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, obviously, but I think that Zimmer has a little more say in those sort of things than other coaches do. Then again, you have a lot of these hybrid guys now. Some that are older school, like Andy Reid, who actually was on Odds and Ends with Mike Tice a couple months ago now, but that was crazy. But it's a good question because you have to wonder how much the GM then wants to be tethered to that coach should things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
You're
saying
right.
Zimmer, but I'm saying in general, you want to have some autonomy. So if the team for some reason if the plan doesn't work, that you don't go down with the ship, I guess. So people have to think about that as well. But I do think that if we were to look at one main positive that Zimmer and Spielman have been able to do in their time together, it's the ability to identify, draft, and develop talent at especially on the defense. I mean, there was an article a year ago on Purple PTSD by one of our guys that pointed out the percentage of the the first, second, or third round defensive draft picks and how they've fared essentially on this defense, and it's like a greater than 90% clip. I mean, Anthony Barr, Kendricks, all these guys have actually turned out. Daniil Hunter have turned into something,
Mm-hmm.
and I think
Yeah.
that's because Zimmer's very cognizant of what his defense needs and how to get the best from each guy.
Right.
It's
And look at the cornerbacks, Joe, this year. I mean, there
yeah,
was a huge need there, and Zimmer was in there pounding the desk, saying, "Okay, we lost our top three starting cornerbacks, and we probably need to draft some." And two of them have all year long have held in there, learning not only the NFL without a training camp and a the whole no off season, and
and
they've
not
got
really
to come
having a
in.
veteran guy like Terrence Newman or something
Exactly.
on-field coaching.
They've learned Zimmer's system, or started to, which is really tough. I mean, he said about a week or so ago that he's finally getting to the point where he's able to trust them a little bit,
Yeah.
and then Danceler makes a play like that, and he demonstrates exactly what Zimmer was saying. So yeah, that's a positive, like the coach was saying. Got to focus on some of that too.
I think that you can hear in Coach Tice the aspect of having done this for his entire life and some of the I don't want to say wariness of fan culture, but that these guys are really, really trying to do what we all hope they could eventually do, which is bring a championship to Minnesota. And like he said a couple times, when the team isn't winning, people look for reasons to pick it apart, so on and so forth. That's human nature. So especially, I mean, I really wanted to ask him. Is that more in Minnesota than other places, just based on the history of this team and some heartbreak that we've had, or is that just something that comes with the territory? Because yeah, I mean these guys, especially this season, the ones that didn't opt out, that maybe they couldn't because their roster spot wasn't secure, or they wanted to go out there and put their best foot forward. They're risking their health more so than usual, which they're always risking their health. It's the NFL
Right.
to bring this product to people, which I think is important because we all need a distraction or something to escape into, because we're essentially all at home 99.9% of the time. And there's just really no it could outside of the financial aspect of it, obviously. I mean, the pressure and the thanklessness of it sometimes I could see why not give these guys credit where credit's due? I mean, you touched on it perfectly with Gladney and Danceler. I mean, everyone's expecting these corners to take years to develop, right? Because that's what we were used to. Xavier Rhodes had a year under his belt before Zimmer got here, and it took him a while. Trey Waynes obviously took a while to get going. Mackenzie Alexander was the same thing. And it just seems like they're really quickly picking up what Zimmer's putting out there. I mean, Danceler had a kind of a rough start to his season, which is to be expected in general, let alone with COVID. And now he's looking like this, the answer at the position for the next decade, barring injury. Once he, I think, gets a little bit older and adds some muscle to his frame, he might not have some of these kind of scary injury rash
Mm-hmm.
things that we've seen. But he deserves, I mean, Danceler, again, deserves a lot of credit. I mean, I like to hold myself accountable for things that I say, and I was a little rough on the guy earlier in the year, and I think he, more than anybody, has just developed into something that's is astounding and really exciting. I mean, that pick could have been and arguably should have been like a game-changing / winning pick. It was so important. It just didn't end up working out that way.
Right.
So I think a lot of people didn't give it the credit that it was
Exactly.
due. But yeah, I can
If
see
you
where
can
that
run
comes
this,
from.
if you can run the Zimmer gauntlet and survive as a rookie, you're doing something right, right?
Totally. I mean, that's
Yeah.
another thing cliche about Zimmer is he doesn't like to play rookies. I don't know how true that is. But yeah, again, this team I feel started really, really rough. Everybody was writing everybody off. Newspapers were writing "fire everybody," period, as a headline. It was crazy. They got us invested again. They got us hoping these last couple weeks. I mean, they haven't been getting blown out by any stretch of the imagination. These have been down to the wire games. That says something. As does the fact that they're still technically in playoff contention, according to my abacus that I found. That's maybe cursed.
Yeah. The old cliche I used to hear when I was at the Timberwolves was Kevin McHale said it's not ice. The move you make, it's the one you don't. Well, they might have made the right move by not making a right move on Dan Bailey this week, Annie.
Great point. I mean, do you feel, that's outside of the offensive line? I think one of the other main things that maybe is the ire of Zimmer's world is the inconsistency that he's had at the kicking position. I mean, he's drafted two guys in the 5th round that were big-legged, really good SEC guys that maybe had a bad senior season, but were really, really good guys, and Daniel Carlson and Blair Walsh. Neither of those guys worked out. Dan Bailey came here as the second most accurate kicker in NFL history, had a rough start to his career here, then obviously imploded those last couple weeks. That's another point. I mean, this season could look completely different than what happened in the Tampa Bay game. But I wonder if he did enough to save his job, quote unquote, which is something that we obviously don't know. It's speculation either way. But I feel that I don't think Zimmer wants to make another change because it's what's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. I think Bailey
I
figured it out. And
Yeah, I think he's safe for the rest of the season, obviously, but I'm sure they'll be looking at kickers in the late round and probably pick one up and someone to challenge him and make a decision as they come back to camp. I don't know what his contract status is because that's always plays into it, but they're gonna, he's been around a long time and he is slowing down a little bit, so he's not going to be here forever. So you've got to keep your eye, like every other position, as players get older. So I'm sure they'll be looking for another young player to maybe develop and see what they can do. But who knows? That's the smallest thing I think. Looking forward on
It
this
looks like
team.
Bailey's under contract for the next 2 seasons. He's got a cap hit
Mm,
this year of $2.15 million, next year 3.8, and then the season after that 4. So you might
well,
be
that
right
will
there.
play into it. Yeah.
Definitely. I'm not obviously a cap guru sort of guy, but I wonder. I'm just a little amazed that this team is still underwater on their cap, considering all the moves they made in the offseason. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people point to Cousins for that, but I don't think that it's not that simple. The biggest fear that I have about this team really reopening the championship contention window is the unknown that is coming with the COVID salary cap situation. I think, I don't like to knock the NFL as an entity very often because I don't want to bite the hand that feeds in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's a little. Why create that crisis when you don't need to? Why not just eat the money that you lost from ticket sales and say, you know what, these guys still came out and performed and played. Why cut the cap by, if it goes down to 175 million, which is the max or the minimum, as opposed to it was supposed to be 210 million next year if it would have gone up the normal rate of about 10 million a season, you're going to basically create again, all sorts of problems from teams that signed a lot of contracts expecting that to happen. First of all, you're going to create issues with players that want extensions because teams won't know how to pay them, or if they should, or what the money is going to be the year after. And then you also create the situation where a lot of guys might have to retire when they for financial reasons, because the teams can't afford to keep maybe veteran guys around that otherwise wouldn't retire, which I don't think is the best look for the NFL either, considering, again, these guys are going out there and playing during a pandemic.
Right.
It's a little frustrating. I think that I think that was part of the reason it took so long to extend Dalvin this year, is because they didn't know what the money was going to be next year. And so, I mean, what do you do when all these teams, again, we're expecting $210 million in 2021, then it gets cut down by, what, 30, 40 million? What do you do?
Well, they're not going to get hit. They're not going to set themselves up to get hit again next year, because the teams took a hit this year, and the NFL is a big money maker. It's $1 billion industry, but the owners are not going to they're going to want to rebound. So yeah, I think there will be a cap change, and I think it will. That's what it comes down to. They're gonna make sure that they can at least mitigate some of their losses from this COVID stuff, and it's a crapshoot. I think what'll happen next year. You may see some good players out there on free agency that can help the Vikings as a part of this. So there's a positive.
You always have the silver lining, man. Sometimes it's like a wet blanket that has a really nice gilded silver edge. It's a great dynamic. Yeah, I was a little frustrated by some of the Jefferson Cousins thing, because not for any reason that either of them did anything wrong, because I don't believe that. I mean, I was kind of setting up a self-deprecating joke when I said I'm not the type of guy that glorifies playing varsity sports for a horrible school.
I let it go. I
let
it go.
You know what I mean? Like yeah, that happens at that level. So yeah, obviously it happens at the pro level. These guys are under a lot of pressure. They want to win. I can't imagine that Jefferson, considering that that's the same game that he broke Moss's team record, has been upset with how Cousins has been getting him the ball. B, on that play, the pocket collapsed, so Cousins had to run to his left and then throw across his body, while Akeem Hicks was a split second away from maybe murdering him, just based on size differential. And so yeah, it just finds it seems like people find new ways to not Cousins, and I'm a little over it at this point.
Well, Joe, and you know that on Monday or Sunday or night or whenever they watch back the game, Justin Jefferson's going to see,
yeah,
Akeem was just about to destroy you, and you couldn't quite make that throw. Okay, I guess I'll let you. I mean, you know what I'm saying? In the heat of the moment, these guys are competitive as more competitive than any we could even imagine ourselves being. This is their livelihood. This is what they do. They prepare. They work. They like the coach said, the heat of the moment, and it's going to go. And then he goes back and says, okay, I was about to die, so sorry. And they figure that out. That's why I asked him. I said, just coach, you have to worry about, if that's an underlying thing, if that's something that's going to happen week to week, then you got to keep your eye on it. But what it does say to me about Jefferson, he certainly thinks he belongs, and he certainly does. I mean, being as jaundiced as I am about the diva nature of wide receivers, I'm going to keep my eye on him and make sure that it doesn't escalate into more, because you slowly saw it creep up gradually with Diggs over time. I mean, he was always had a smile and everything early on and said all the right things. Well, things started creeping in. He had some different agenda he was concerned about. We found out, and I don't want that to happen with Justin Jefferson. He's having an incredible season. He's having, he's setting records. I mean, like you put in the agenda, he's already broke one record of Moss's, and he's looking at some other ones around the league. He's made the Pro Bowl. My goodness, this guy is the sky could be the limit for him. Or then again, maybe this is as high as his ceiling is. We don't know. Anyway, it's for me, it's worth keeping an eye on to see how he reacts emotionally as he goes forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot on the show that was the precursor to this one, Morning Joe's, a lot of great, almost every great wide receiver. We're seeing it this week with Randy Moss and Jerry Rice kind of going at it in the media about who's better. These guys have that aspect of their personality where they're hyper competitive, and it lends itself to being good at the position because of the nature of how being a wide receiver just works fundamentally. You're essentially trying to beat the guy in front of you, and do, run full speed, make cuts, speed up during those cuts, and then catch a ball that's being thrown at a clip that would break most regular people's fingers if they tried to catch it. And it just seems like a lot of those guys, T.O., Randy Moss, Jerry Rice doesn't seem to be that way, but he's still a very competitive guy. I think he had the work ethic. I mean, if anyone that I could compare to work ethic of Michael Jordan in the NFL, it'd probably be Jerry Rice, Chris Carter, all these guys. Sometimes it goes a little too far. T.O. is a good example of that. Chad Ochocinco is a good example of that. But
Chris Carter was an example of that.
Yeah, he really was. I wonder. I always had this weird idea that him and Moss were like really good friends, but it seemed, I've heard things from Sansevier and about Carter not wanting to mentor Moss, and Moss has kind of kept Carter off some of these lists he's been throwing out recently. Even the one about Jefferson being the offensive rookie of the year, he's joined like the Mount Rushmore of Minnesota Vikings wide receivers. Me, Percy Harvin, he said Percy Harvin, Sammy White. He did say Carter. I'm like, what? What is going on?
They were up in Dante Culpepper's grill quite often. They lived up like Chris Carter did. If he wasn't getting them the ball in the right place, this is stuff that happens. As a head coach, you better recognize it. I mean, I'm not saying it's a red flag, but it's something you got to see. You better know that it's there. So
yeah, and Coach Tice touched on that. I think Zimmer does. We saw it last year with Thielen and Diggs after the Bears game, and then Thielen ends up on Cousins' podcast. I don't think that was not. I think the team was involved in that, obviously, more so than I'm not saying Thielen wouldn't otherwise have done it. I'm sure it was his idea. I don't know. But, yeah, the team, I think, keeps an eye on that sort of thing, especially considering what they just went through with ESPN cover boy Stephon Diggs. You touched on your time at the Timberwolves, and there's an article that you wrote for Vikings Territory this week that has gotten a tremendous response from people. I mean, it's been astounding how many people have been sharing that story on social media and reading it. I haven't really told you. I wanted to surprise you on the show. I mean, at any given time, if there's like 50 people reading that story, it's been like 48 hours. It's a great story about Tom Hanneman, who passed away recently, and your experience being in kind of his world and what a great guy he was. And I wanted you to kind of talk about that a little bit on the show.
I'd be glad. Yeah, I'd be glad to. Thanks, Joe. It was a tough blow last week when we heard that Hanny had passed away, and you mentioned all the other testimonials and tributes and stories about him that have come out there, and there have been plenty. And the reason is because he touched so many people. Everything they're saying about him is absolutely genuine. He was the nicest guy, and that's kind of what I wanted to write my story about was, here's me joining the Timberwolves, 5 or 6 years in, and the weekend of the All-Star game, and my boss had hired me. It was a week before the All-Star game, and he just says, "Okay, there's where you sit, have at it." He goes, "I gotta go," because they were just going crazy there with what's needed to be done there. So I kind of got lost early on there in the shuffle a little bit with the other people, and didn't know if I was going to fit in. Well, eventually, who shows up at my desk is Tom Hanneman, just to say hi and introduce himself and chat with me and get to know me. And that the rest of our time there, it was just a continuation of that. This guy he genuinely cared about the people he worked with, and having a relationship with him, and just a prince of a guy. And, over the top of that, he was funny as heck. One of my favorite lines, I grew up when the Timberwolves first started, listening to Harlan and Hanneman late night when they're on the West Coast and 9 o'clock game, and nobody's, they were kind of crazy with some of the stuff they said. But I just remember one night after or during the game, the game was over and Hanneman was summing it up, and he says, the Dallas Mavericks had beaten the Timberwolves, and he goes, the Dallas Mavericks were sleeping soldiers tonight. And then there's a pause, and he goes, they were intense. So, and it's, and that's him. He had these puns even throughout there. And he's playing practical jokes. He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being, and great family man. And I think it really, the sports community knew him. Blindsided him when all of a sudden he passed away in his sleep. And, especially this time of year, it's a tough deal. And I really felt I had to write about him and just say, I didn't have to write about the fact that I knew him so that I could say, hey, I'm somebody. I wanted people to know he treated everybody just like he treated me. And it was just it was wonderful to have, to get to the point where you can call him a friend and him yours, and I'll greatly miss him, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I think that it's the number one determining factor of someone's legacy is how they treat other people, especially when they're in a position of power in one way or another. There's a lot of not so nice people in the world, in every walk of life, and I think that people. I just saw the Pixar movie Coco for the first time this week, and it's essentially about like Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, and in the afterlife, these people still exist until no one remembers them anymore, and then they kind of fade away, which is kind of touching. And it's stuff like that you can just see the outpouring for a guy like that across the board. I could say, I don't talk about this a lot on the show because we're obviously do things from a Vikings slant, but I had season tickets to the Timberwolves for a really long time during the KG era. And one of the fondest moments or times in my life was the 2003 season and watching them get that close to the championship. Going 6 games against the Lakers at their full power with Kobe and Shaq when, Cassell wasn't playing, so KG literally had to play point guard in that series.
Yep.
And they took it to 6 games. It was crazy, but he really, more so than anybody, encapsulates that era for me, or just my entire life of being a Timberwolves fan. And so it's been a rough couple weeks, months for the Minnesota sports market. Sid Hartman too. Right. But what's cool about it is you get to see how many people these guys touched and were nice to. You hear about stories that no one ever talked about until now with Sid too. And so it sounds like he was a great guy and he's going to be missed for sure. Kind of an awkward segue, but the Saints game obviously still has some intrigue to it. I don't know how good they are. I think their chances this season took a huge hit when Breeze got injured. Now that Michael Thomas is on IR, which I wish I would have not been so sullen in my fantasy leagues. I played him in the playoffs and I lost by 2 points. And him and Eric Ebron, neither of them played, so that was really, really cool because I have the most stacked roster I've ever had. But hearing that you lost in your playoffs, that just makes it all up to me.
To my kid, to my son. It was great. He's got Jefferson. I've got Cook and Thielen. And my mistake was playing a couple Packers. Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, who both laid an egg, and that's what I get since I'm a Vikings reporter of sorts. So it was tough. The Saints just aren't the same team they were earlier in the years, and they aren't without Breeze. Maybe he gets back there. Maybe he plays. He got the one game under his belt last week and plays better this week against the Vikings, of course. But I don't know. I agree with you, Joe. They've just you've seen some chinks in their armor. They're still a very potent offense, and they're still can play some good defense. So it's not going to be a cakewalk for the Vikings, but I think they need to get healthy. They got what my daughter just became a nurse this week, and we were talking about his rib injuries. of Breeze, counting his ribs, he had 11 of his ribs are wrecked, and it's like he goes, that's like almost half of what he has,
Yeah.
So it was kind of funny, but and a punctured lung. How do you come back from that so darn? So
I don't know. I was wondering the same thing about Madison and his appendectomy. I mean, it's obviously a much more controlled situation, right, health-wise, than because a surgeon did it. It wasn't a trauma-based thing, even though his appendix probably was based on trauma. But Breeze, I mean, that's really scary. And it just seems like I never heard of an NFL player getting a punctured lung, and I can think of two now this season. One of the Vikings players had a punctured lung as well, but I think he was stepped on by a really big or long pair of cleats. To be honest with you, I would rather play Breeze than Taysom Hill, just based on what we saw from Trubisky, and Taysom Hill can obviously extend plays with his legs, and they obviously want Breeze to warm up to the playoffs. But you touch on the Packers as well. They struggled against teams that you think they would otherwise blow out. I mean, they beat the Panthers by 5. They almost lost to the Jaguars a couple weeks ago. It's a very, I don't know if it's based on COVID or what, but it just feels like more so than any time that I can remember, I can't really point to what usually, it's not 100% obviously, but if someone were to ask me, like, who do you think the final 4 teams will be in the conference championship games, I would say I don't know. I mean, the Chiefs would be the one I'm most confident in. For a while, I thought it'd be Packers,
absolutely.
Packers, Saints, maybe the Seahawks, but their defense is bad, their offensive line is bad. Obviously, the Steelers were a front runner for a while, but now they're
Rams.
Yeah, the Rams. I keep forgetting about the Rams for some reason.
They're up and down. They'll play some great games, and then they'll lay an egg like they did a couple weeks ago last week.
The Cardinals are doing it too. It's just everyone seems to be doing that. I think the Rams. You bring up a good point, because that seems to be Coach Tice's favorite for the NFC. He's mentioned them a few times, and so I'm just gonna stop having independent thoughts and just go to odds and ends with Mike Tice and copy what he says each week. That's the best way to do it, because he's killing it.
You better do it quick, because you're down by 56 points. You lost.
Nothing. I mean, actually, in terms of context relative to past years, that's actually not that bad.
That's true.
So.
In striking distance now.
It's been. Admittedly though, this has been a hard year to predict for the Vikings and in general.
Oh yeah.
For everyone not named Mike Tice, I would say for the Saints game, I'm gonna pick the Vikings to win, because that would be a very Vikings thing to do, to get us hopeful again. And maybe the Cardinals will lose, and then we'll be all excited about the last week and the potential for making the playoffs, and then we'll get blown out by the Lions or something. It's very serendipitous. I think the Vikings offense is playing at a very high clip. I would like to see, just for longevity's sake, in 2021, the main thing, and I wrote an article about this week, that I'm worried about is Dalvin getting some sort of nagging injury in these last 2 games that'll carry over to next season, especially if these games end up being meaningless.
Stop it.
Because I don't own any real wood; it's all pressboard stuff, so I'll knock on floor. But I wrote about the curse of 370 and running back that have over 370 touches, and what their next season is like. And so that's a little bit of a concern. But I would like to see maybe Dalvin get between 15 and 20 touches, as opposed to between 30 and 40, and see what we can do. Maybe with a little bit more zest in the offense, in the passing game, get Thielen a little bit more involved outside of the red zone. But I do think this offense is playing really well. The defense had a down week, but I think they'll do fine without Michael Thomas. I think they'll do fine against Breeze. As we saw last year, maybe they'll move the defensive ends inside and make sure that Breeze is kind of unable to get his throwing lanes, because he's not the tallest guy. I think that was the key to that game last year. I'll say the Vikings win this game 38-27. How about that?
Wow. Well, that's a little higher than I'm going with, but that's good. You need to.
I done 57-0.
You could have, could have a chance then. I think that the Saints are, they got another week with Breeze out there. They still got Taysom Hill, can put up some points. They're going to be fine. I worry about the Vikings on Wednesday. Is today Wednesday?
Yes.
Today. Okay. Their practice, their midweek practice, I think happened yesterday, and eight players were gone, including Hendricks, and so I worry about that. I'm thinking the Vikings are going to lose this one, and it's going to be 31-24. I think the Saints know where they're, they've got plenty to play for. They're at home. The Vikings, they'll play hard, and they've had the Saints number in the past, but I think there's going to be too much firepower, and, they have like a minuscule chance of making the playoffs. If the Vikings went out and the Cardinals lose out and the Bears lose one, the Vikings with tiebreakers can get in, but that's pretty remote. So I think you will see Dalvin in there until their chances to make the playoffs are completely gone. That's the way teams in the NFL work, but certainly Zimmer. But I hope they don't get him worn out and so he's hurt going into next year. But no, that's where I'm at. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. They're still in it, so you get to on Christmas Day, you get to watch the Vikings and still pull for them and have something to cheer for. So.
And the Cardinals play the 49ers and the Rams, so it's two divisional
right.
games. Who knows what will happen there? And it would be very, very, again, serendipitous if they were to get knocked out of the playoffs by the Vikings because of what happened. I think was it 2007 with the 4th and 24 against the Cardinals?
Yep.
So that would be nice. Be a nice belated Christmas present. And with that in mind, I want to thank everybody in the Detroit Lakes area for tuning into the show and sharing it on social media. We've had a really great response so far as I've been able to track from my house down here in Minneapolis. I wanted to thank you, Mr. Oberly, for always sticking by my side and listening to me rant incoherently about this team and waver week to week in my emotional well-being in regards to the team. You are a great guy, and I wish you and your family the best Christmas, the best holidays, and
thank you, Joe. Same to you. This program is therapy. It helps me as well. I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk Vikings with you, and I wish the same to you. I hope holidays are great, and hope we get a win on Friday. That'd be fun.
It would be fun. It'd be the best Christmas present ever. I want to remind everyone one last time to check out Odds and Ends by Tice. Each Saturday he posts his peers into the future game picks. He's been on fire. I think he's been like 15-1 or 15-2 in the last 3 weeks. So he picks 5 games. Go check that out, especially if you're in like Iowa or somewhere where sports betting is legal. But beyond that, thanks everyone again for tuning in. This has been the Vikings Territory Breakdown. We will be back next week, hopefully, to talk a Vikings win over the Saints. Skol.